analysis of events. Professor Dawkins is interested in scientific truth. That's the kind of truth that he's interested in. And even if you think it's irrelevant to the point of what the gospel authors were getting at, that first needs to be clarified before you can then begin actually uncovering what the stories are about. So I think Professor Dawkins is asking from a scientific perspective, and maybe you think that that scientific approach is wrong, but if you just take it for a moment, maybe this is how we find out that it is wrong. Let's take a scientific approach, ask the question, did this occur?
I think that it's inappropriate to use a question like that to attempt to undermine the validity of the entire, what would you say, deep mythological enterprise.
Well, suppose we weren't doing that. Suppose we were asking out of interest. Suppose that we were all here devout Christians, maybe even Jungian Christians, and we thought, this is interesting, over dinner. Do you think it really happened, like scientifically? Would your answer just be, I don't know?
Yes.
And you wouldn't consider it, I mean, it's not an inappropriate question to ask, just on a point of interest.
Right.
Did this really occur? And I think so often people are asking you that, and especially given the context of this conversation, we've heard everything that you're saying about metaphor and myth, but because the question is still then being asked, did it really happen? You know that that's what you're being asked. And the way you just so easily said yes, I wonder why you struggle to do that in so many other circumstances.
I think because I don't look at the situation the same. The way that Dr. Dawkins and I look at the situation are really quite different, and at many, many, many levels. You know, so even on the meme question, for example, you know, like, I know the literature on the history of religious ideas. I see how these ideas have battled across millennia in a manner that is very reminiscent to me of the same sort of claim that Dr. Dawkins is putting forward with regards to meme. I know that literature. Dr. Dawkins doesn't know that literature. And it's very difficult for me to communicate from within the confines of that literature.
Hello, everybody. I'm back. Hello. Tim Pool just quit YouTube because his Russian funding dried up due to the leak. What? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? These are like really uncomfortable right now. Okay. Let's go back. Essentially, I should probably give... I have to wear these in order to hear if like the audio is coming in funny, but they're so uncomfortable right now. Okay, just to summarize. We have two brilliant people. One developed the meme thing. I'm so tired. I hope I say this correctly, honestly, because I might be getting terminology wrong, but essentially, Richard Dawkins came up with like memes or identified memes in cultural trends, which is like there's like a Baldwin effect. Hold on. Let me double check. Richard first came up with the idea of a meme, something that spreads through imitation. Okay, so he came up with that. Jordan is saying essentially like, I'm trying to build off of your theory. I don't know if you would call it a theory though, but just for the sake of me moving the fuck on. Essentially, Jordan is like his student, but Richard keeps rejecting it. I said in the other video that there's a line of communication that's gonna fundamentally like clash. It's the magnet thing that I don't know how to articulate. There's no language to bridge, at least in my brain as of now. This is like something I've been thinking about for a while. There really is no language to merge the two. And what I was trying to build off of in the video before that was the concept of truth under different types of frameworks. So we had like pragmatic. How do you test for that type of truth? There's a lot of different ones. I'm just trying to build frameworks visually in your mind. So if you know that if you're asking somebody, well, is it true? And this person is operating in a framework that you have no idea exists yet, you sound stupid. Like you do, Jordan. And so Jordan has to somehow integrate both levels of truth that Richard understands empirically. I guess another way to look at it too is like bridging the subjective and the objective together. And that's going to be difficult because somebody who follows the scientific method for understanding truth, there's a couple ways they do it, but a lot of time it has to go off of what they see, like visually. It branches off into behaviorism, but that goes more with utility. It's still a truth, because some people determine something true by its utility. I don't remember which one that's under. I apologize. I think it's pragmatic, actually. I know it's pragmatic. Let's check. Pragmatic. What is oh yeah, it is. Got one. Anyways, so essentially it's like another, did that just get really loud? My apologies. Fixed it. Essentially. Oh, that's so annoying. So what, I'm supposed to stand still like this? I don't think I can do it. Okay, let me just spam the chat with 2s if it's really bad. I can hear it, but I'll lower it in my ears. Fuck. What was I saying? It gets so distracting. Essentially, Jordan has to bring somebody into a framework that they almost dogmatically disagree with. Why are you using dogmatic? Because it's like he's a little, you know how you'll hear people say, like usually religious people will be like, oh, atheists are just as religious. There's truth in that, like 100%. Some people that are so limited in their thinking, which it's like, well, how would a scientist get like that? And it's like, well, you base truth off of either what works, that's one type, or what you can observe. They're kind of both observation. But remember how I gave the 4 types of perception and they were all true? And the only one that Richard Dawkins, arguably, hypothetically, would find basis in is the observation. That's kind of tricky because of, it's not that it's tricky, it's that it's such a not comprehensive view of people. I don't know how to word it. Okay. Like I don't. The best example I give is like the psychosis example, which I'm trying not to go that deep. Okay. So essentially, ooh, that's annoying. Is it bad? It doesn't seem like it. So much distraction here. Welcome. Okay. Nice to meet ya. Nice to meet ya. So essentially, if Jordan says, when Richard asks him questions about literal things, did it literally happen? Did it actually happen? He is going to dismiss Jordan unless he says yes. And the issue that Jordan is having is that if he agrees to what Dawkins is asking, then he's like, under his worldview, he is righteous, almost like pretentious, because when you get to Jordan Peterson's level of understanding of of this being a broader like approach to memes or just viewing systems, you understand that you cannot dismiss certain truths. There isn't just one truth. And it sounds like super pseudo intellectual. Like, hear me out. I get it. Okay. It really does. One, unified. Okay, like I get it. But if you think of it in terms of perception, and we understand that if I relay a story to you, the way you interpret it is going to be fundamentally different. Telephone. Okay. Another way to look at this sort of dynamic is the allegory of the cave. You don't know what you don't know, in a way. But it's like at the same time, you got to be careful. You know? Got to be careful. So did I land that? Did I land that? I think I did. For where we're at right now. But if Jordan can get through to Richard Dawkins, that means that like religion in and of itself, which I've been saying holds some truth, it will have a biological basis, or it'll have scientific evidence for the Bible. Which sounds insane. It does, but it's, you know how people say like, oh, religion helps them to adapt. And it's like, absolutely, it helps. Like, about a year ago, when I would think of the Bible helping, I would go off of research that shows that it absolutely lowers stress. My issue was but if you don't believe in it, you can't fake a belief. You know what I mean? You can't just believe in the tooth fairy because a lot of people do, right? It's like one way to look at it. But then over probably like the last month, I'm just like, no, there's utility in both. And they're both on, like the way that I envision it, they're both necessary, but they both need to figure out how to integrate with each other. So how would you integrate religion to an atheist? Science. Science. Remember how I said a few months ago that there's a scientific basis. There's an argument for why religion is true and how you can convince a bunch of secularist atheists, but I didn't know how to word it. But when I described it, it's like when the mind breaks down, it's following a linear path. And it's like, okay, Torrie, what the fuck does that mean? I just realized like an hour ago, I was like, wait a minute, did Jordan Peterson just prove that? He did. They're going to be talking about how like certain thoughts and beliefs evolved to the point where they're automatic. Remember how I was saying that there was like a moment where I had I don't know if I would call it OCD, but we definitely did for like the sake of argument. And it was like at one point in my life, I think I was 5, maybe 7, unclear. I developed this belief in my head that if I didn't say my full name when I sneezed, I would die. God would kill me. And I knew cognitively that this wasn't true. And I was like, where the hell did that come from? It went away after like talking to my second mother, who was a child psychologist. So I don't remember exactly what she said, but it went away. And I remember thinking about it like shortly after, like within the next 2 years, just like, why did I develop that I don't even know what you would call it. It's delusional, but it's also around the time where you're learning what's right and what's wrong. Why did I immediately go to death? I'm like a child. You know what I mean? Nobody ever said that. And so another thing that going back to the psychosis example, it's like, why do people fall under serious religious beliefs? Where do those come from? You could say, oh, they grew up Catholic, or oh, they were going to the church. Or it's an evolutionary adaptation to trying to understand the would it be stimuli? The stuff that isn't making sense in your head, trying to distinguish reality. Why does the brain fall into these thinkings? And why is it that some people that aren't fully far on the religious spectrum, like what differentiates them? And the only thing I could hypothesize was like time. It's like if somebody gets up at Thanksgiving dinner, takes off their clothes and screams they're the Messiah, they're probably manic. With love, okay? I'm just relaying the shit that I would talk about to see if anything hits. Anyways, so Jordan Peterson has identified the, I guess you could say, I don't know. Right now I'm saying like the argument that proves religion is real. It doesn't necessarily prove that it's real, but what it does prove is it's like, what would it prove? Slow down, bitch. It would prove that when the mind goes wonky, it grounds itself in religion. I don't know how I've said it before, but something along those lines. Even when everything is chaotic and you don't know what reality is, you cling to these beliefs. Is it taught to us? Did you pick up knowledge from just media? Sure. But what about it kept it ingrained? And so Jordan kind of goes into that, why certain beliefs or ideas will become almost autonomous. That's more, well, I'm sorry, that's the Baldwinian effect. And then Jordan Peterson is just giving grounding to it, I guess. When I talked about the mind stuff before, psychosis in particular, I had said the only people that would get it either had to experience witnessing it, like observation. So a doctor absolutely has the capability to get there. The issue that I know exists, which it tends to be a miss when we talk about politics or whatever, is that we only have about 8 beds per hospital where they take the mentally ill or get 5150, but that's all types of mental disorders. And so they rotate people out very quickly, 5150, 72 hours. The doctors I call it on the 8th floor, so forgive me. Floor 8, like it's fine. But those doctors also rotate. They're not the same ones. They rotate between hospitals, and that's just in like the area. So you can imagine that getting the same doctor to observe you, not only you, but also talk to the family. And they can't really take what the family says because they don't observe it. Okay. So it's like, if a doctor were to get it, they would have had to understand who the patient was before they entered psychosis. How often does that happen? Like a psychiatrist that has known you when you could consent on forms and shit, knew you since it's almost... It's not impossible because I have a doctor like that, but the only reason why I do is because I witnessed what I witnessed. How often do people witness that? Probably less. Okay. So I was like, so when Jordan Peterson in particular started to talk about these things more recently, I was like, damn, Jordan Peterson really has like either connections with his patients and he really wants to help them, or I'm just too dense. I don't know. So that's a little, I'll shut up now. Thank you for the super chat. Keep your girl off OnlyFans, one chat at a time. One of the worst things you can do as a human being is lie to your fellow man. That's what religion does on a daily basis. So yeah, because Sam Harris is also not trained in philosophy. He's a brilliant guy, but it's when we're not talking about the different truths, it starts to get really convoluted. I will say that thank you for that, but the issue with religion is when people who are operating from, I can't find the word for it, but they're operating, I'm inclined to say tribal. I don't know if that's correct though, but operating from this really polarized and almost fear-based. It's all fear-based all the time whenever you polarize something. And like being able to identify why that happens, that's very tricky. You have to be self-aware. The things that pull you are usually things that reveal a lot more about yourself, and you have to be able to identify it. And if you can identify it, you can identify it in other people. Most people operate in these realms and they don't even know it. And so what you have is you think it's religion that's breaking people apart. I thought it could have been religion breaking people apart. But essentially, I guess people do lie to each other. And so how do you get away from that? You have to be self-aware. You have to admit when you're wrong. And that's a topic for another day. But I guess that goes with fucking psychotherapy. So when I see religious wars, if you will, it's less about the differential in belief sets. It's less about that non-religious, religious, we do it my way. It's more about people operating from like darker selves, like your shadow selves. Because although you think you might be telling the truth, your behavior tells on you. That's why I point out projection all the time. And so if you're operating from like things you don't even think you're lying about, well, to somebody taking in that perception, they're going to assume you're telling the truth and then operate from that. But what happens if it's not actually true? Reality is not true. Like, it's as simple as that. And it sounds bizarre. Believe me, I know. Okay, let's watch the video. I'm getting too much. I'm going too deep. We're going meta. Okay, get me out of here.
Because it's extensive and deep. And we're dealing with things that we don't understand the relationship between metaphoric truth and value predicated truth and factual truth. We don't understand that. It's a big problem. We cannot, there's no evidence whatsoever from the scientific perspective that we can orient ourselves in the world merely in consequence of the facts.
Sure.
And that's a fact. And it's a fact that's been detailed out in great detail in the last 60 years by people from a variety of different disciplines. We have to prioritize the facts. That's a value hierarchy. There may be true and false ways of prioritizing facts, but you can't determine the truth or falsehood of the way that you prioritize facts by making reference to the facts. That's a big problem.
Okay, let's talk about that as perhaps a slight detour here, because I think we do need to come back to this Christ resurrection thing. But Professor Dawkins, would you say that underlying the scientific enterprise is a fundamentally unscientific assumption? You can make scientific investigations in the world, but in order to do so, you need to choose what to prioritize. You need to choose what to investigate. You also need to value the truth. You need to have a value and a motivation for doing it in the first place. Those kinds of things cannot themselves be scientifically justified. And so does the scientific enterprise have an unscientific assumption into space?
I suppose it does. I mean, I think that maybe just be Jordan and Richard, by the way. I think that Jordan prioritizes myth and I prioritize fact. And I think myth is kind of vaguely interesting, but it's not the be-all and end-all of my life. I think it's somewhat secondary to scientific fact, the sort of facts that tell us how old the universe is, how old the world is, the history of life, the engineering achievements of landing a spacecraft on a comet. These are the things that science can do. And as I said, the predictions of quantum theory, to come back to that, the predictions of quantum theory, which are verified to a sufficient number of decimal places that it's equivalent to predicting the width of North America to 1 hair's breadth. Now, that is, however difficult quantum theory is to understand, that is what you can get from quantum theory. Now, the mysteries of the Bible, if they are mysteries, aren't in the same league. I mean, they just don't cut it.
Attention men who still believe in the American dream. In a world gone mad.
Make the case, for example, that you're more of a Christian than you think you are. So, for example, I think that the scientific enterprise is motivated by the axiomatic presumption that truth tends towards a unity. I think that it's predicated on the notion that there is a logical order that's intrinsic to the cosmos, that that fundamental order is good, that it's intelligible to human beings, and that discovering that order and aligning ourselves with it makes for life more abundant. I think that the scientific enterprise is also predicated on the idea that the truth will set you free. And I think all of those axioms are religious and derived from the Judeo-Christian tradition. And if you don't believe that, you have to account for why science emerged in Europe and nowhere else in the entire history of humanity, for example, and why it's under assault from like all quarters now as that underlying metaphysic disappears. Like you haven't had to be concerned with the mythological substrate in your lifetime in some sense because it was intact.
Yes.
And so the universities could flourish and you had your freedom, remarkable freedom to pursue your scientific enterprise wherever you wanted, and people lauded you for it. Like that time is threatened, and seriously so. And I think it's partly because these metaphysical assumptions have now become questionable, and that's part of the reason that I'm attending to them. It's not because I don't admire the accuracy of quantum prediction, for example, or celebrate what Musk is doing with his capability of sending rockets to Mars. It's like more power to the technological enterprise. But you know what's happening in the universities? It's awful. And that's not a scientific problem. It's okay.
I agree about that.
Okay.
I think it's an interesting question why science emerged in Europe. I mean, and I'm not enough of a historian to know. It is even possible that Christianity did have something to do with that, and I wouldn't categorically deny that. But that doesn't in any way increase my trust in the validity of Christian propositions like the resurrection, the virgin birth, the miracles, and Jesus is the Son of God. Christianity may have had some kind of historical facilitating effect that led to the Renaissance, that led to the scientific revolution, and that would be a very interesting historical analysis, but it doesn't bear upon the truth of the propositions of the Christian religion.
Okay, let's concentrate on the resurrection for a moment. Now, unfortunately, see, this is part of the problem. Part of the problem with discussions like this is that the mode of approach that's taken by the mythological tends to circle and wander. Like it doesn't, because you have to shine light on the problem from multiple perspectives. That's why it's often encoded in image, for example, or in drama. It's not the same tack as a purely propositional and logical argument, so it's more difficult to make. But let me tell you a story that I believe bears on the resurrection. You tell me what you think about it, because this is a very difficult story to account for. It's going to take me about 5 minutes because it's complicated, but there's no way around it, I don't think. So there's a strange scene in the Gospels where Christ tells his followers that unless he's lifted up like the bronze serpent, and there can be no hope for the redemption of mankind unless he's lifted up like the bronze serpent in the desert. Okay, this is a very strange thing for someone to say. So you need to know what the story of the bronze serpent in the desert was and what it signifies. And I think we can understand it psychologically. I really do believe this. And the concordance of that story, which was generated millennia before with Christ's utterance, is something I just cannot imagine how anyone put those two things together, especially given the lack of explicit understanding about the relationship. So let me detail it. So there's a scene in Exodus, in the Exodus story, where the Israelites are doing their usual fractious foolishness and whining about the fact that they're lost and bemoaning the loss of their privileges under the Pharaoh and complaining about the power dynamics of their leadership and just generally being followers of Cain, let's say. And God, the cruel God that you refer to, decides to send among his suffering subjects poisonous snakes to bite them, which seems a little over the top, you might say. But in response to that, I would say there's no situation so terrible that some damn fool can't make it infinitely worse. And so that's what happens to the Israelites. So
If you guys think that Jordan Peterson is saying these like facts, hi, you'll think literally. With love, okay? There's metaphors. You know?
they're being bitten by these poisonous snakes, and the leaders of the people who've wandered from God go to Moses and they say, look, we know you've got a pipeline to God, and you know there's a lot of snakes and they're doing a lot of biting, and maybe you could just ask him to, you know, call off the serpents. And so Moses, who's not very happy with the Israelites either, decides that he'll go talk to God. And God says something very strange. He doesn't say, to hell with the Israelites, more snakes is what they need. And he doesn't say, well, I produced the snakes, so I'll get rid of them.
He's literally explaining the story and whatever the meaning is from the story, what lesson you get from the story is fundamental in all humans. How we get there, or how somebody tries to articulate it, there's no language for it. But some people take these things literally. Some people have less, I don't know if it's openness or if it's just abstract. I don't know. It's like you can, when you think abstractly, you can almost like, it's like creatively. You can see a system, how it connects to something, but you don't know how to backwards it. Though, like me, I'm just kidding, but not really. But abstract is like you can see connections in a lot of different things. It doesn't mean it's the right way. You like, I feel like if you think really literally, you probably struggle with social cues, right? Or if you think really, see, but you can also see literal thinking in something like schizophrenia as well. But you can all like different types of people can have different types of thinking. You can also see the opposite, you know, in schizophrenia. So it's temperament, I believe. I don't know.
He says something very, very peculiar. He said,
why not just say it as it is? Why all the games? What do you mean games? What do you mean games? You mean the story? Like they're telling it? I'm asking genuinely. So I can better understand how to explain it when I'm doing these
have the
videos.
Israelites gather together all their bronze and make a giant stake and put a serpent on it, a bronze serpent, which is the symbol of healing, by the way, that even the Greeks use. That is symbol of Asclepius. It's a very old symbol, very widespread. It's still used by physicians today. And then he says, put it up where the Israelites can see it. And if they go look at it, then the serpent's poison won't harm them. And I read that and I thought, that's exactly what psychotherapists discovered as they all converged in the 20th century on the utility of exposure therapy as curative. And that's the pharmacon. A little of the poison that hurts you cures you. It's the same principle that's used for vaccines, by the way. So what we saw in psychotherapy is that if you get people to voluntarily confront the things that are poisoning them, so to speak, that hurt their life, that frighten them and disgust them, they become braver and more well adapted. It isn't that they become less afraid, because that's been very carefully tested. It's that They learn by watching themselves expose themselves to the things that they once fled from, that there's more to them than they think, and that generalizes across situations. And it's the same mechanism that underlies learning as such, because children, when they learn, put themselves on the edge of ragged disaster, and that's where they advance. And so what God tells the Israelites, essentially, in this dramatic endeavor, is that it's better for them to face the terrors that confront them than to be shielded from the terrors, or for them to hide from them. That they'll be better people if they face what's right in front of them, even if it's poisonous. And so it's like, okay, that's pretty damn interesting and quite remarkable. And then that symbol is used, for example, by the Greeks to symbolize medicine as such. But then there's this additional weird twist, which is Christ identifies with that bronze serpent. You think, okay, that's a very peculiar thing for anyone to do.
Like, think about it when I say it's like the allegory of the cave. We all know the story, but we all interpret it a little bit differently. Still a lesson. It's breaking down like the complex ideas that are not so obvious through communication. Like, you've had to read it. I don't know. And then symbols, it's like it can represent more than one thing. Kind of like how like in my opinion, I feel like numbers are symbols. But like, I'm also insane.
What exactly does that mean? Well, so then you might say, well, what's the most poisonous thing that you could possibly face?
Me.
If you dramatize the idea of poison itself.
So when he says dramatize or dramatize, he's talking about hyperrealism. If I had to like put a word to it, what is hyperrealism? If you're going to try to paint a picture of a hyper-real Torrie, you're going to draw a huge mouth because she doesn't shut the fuck up. You're going to give her devil horns because I am Satan. Kidding. I'm kidding. You're going to give teeny tiny mosquito bite little tatas. You're going to give a dog without a spot, or a dog with a bunch of spiders on it. Something like, you know what I mean? It's like hyperrealism. You could also see hyperrealism in caricatures. You know, like the ones they draw of you at Six Flags, same idea, okay? It's hyper real so that you really get those points across. So if I was going to draw somebody who, I don't know, was evil because I didn't have a word for evil, I would probably draw somebody who is like in a psychosis with their eyes dilated. It looks the same to me. But you could also draw Diddy. You could also draw what's his name? Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey too. Now you put them all together. What are you gonna get? A fucking disgusting character, but it's not gonna look. Well, see, that wouldn't be hyperrealism because it wouldn't be like it can't just be a dragon or like something like that. You know what I mean?
If you wanted people to face what was worst so that they could become strongest, and the answer to that is the most unjust possible painful death and the ultimate confrontation with malevolence. And that's what's dramatized in the Passion story. Now, does that redeem everyone? Maybe. Maybe the idea is that if we were courageous enough to look death in the face unflinchingly, and if we spent our time putting our finger on the source of evil itself, it would revitalize ourselves to a degree that would be unimaginable. Now, as a biologist, you know, you could think about this too, because I don't remember the philosopher who said it. I think it was Whitehead, but that might be wrong. We let our ideas die instead of us, right? So human beings have evolved so that we can undergo these deaths of our own ideas and the rejuvenation that emerges in consequence of that. That seems to be something like evolution towards what? Towards the process of sacrificial logos as the thing that redeems human beings. And that makes us biologically unique too, because we can die in ideation and imagination. instead of dying in actuality. Does that fundamentally redeem us? Does that deliver us from death and evil? Maybe. Like, the job isn't done, obviously.
Richard, the story that we've just heard, the Old Testament bronze serpent, it's rhyming with the New Testament Christ depicting himself as that bronze serpent. I think, from Jordan, if I may, as Richard suggests, from what I've heard you say before on this same story, there's something about that harmony between that New Testament Jesus and that Old Testament story, which is so profound and so impressive that it's difficult to imagine it having sort of naive human authorship. What do you make of that story? And
This is the important part when they talk about like divinely fucking ordained and self-authorship. This is fundamentally where their frameworks clash.
that assertion?
Well, it doesn't impress me. I mean,
We know.
I don't understand why you would say that.
You're dry, Richard. I'm just kidding. Like the video. You're boring. I'm just kidding.
I don't think Jordan actually said it had divine inspiration. Maybe he did.
Not divine inspiration necessarily, but more than just, as I say, naive human authorship. Not like someone just sat down and wrote stories.
At minimum, it's a staggeringly brilliant literary move, especially given the fact that relationship hasn't been explicated before.
Do you think, for example, if you were looking in scripture for something which would identify this as a God-given text, maybe you as a scientist would look for some scientific information. It might have told you the shape of DNA or something like that. But do you think that
Jordan,
this debate between Richard Dawkins and Jordan Peterson with Alex O'Connor mediating it has been like a long, I don't know if I would say a feud, but like kinda. I don't think Jordan said anything negative about him, but I've seen some things where he's like, he's drunk on symbols. And he also said that to him like twice, the second time in here. Anyways, it's a debate that came out yesterday. It's on Jordan Peterson's channel. But yeah, we're covering it. We did the first half of it earlier today. So,
yeah, we can perhaps get onto that. But do you think that a literary brilliance of a similar kind or a similar intensity, that if the Bible is not a scientific text, you might be looking for some scientific fact which it couldn't have otherwise known? Is it possible that some kind of genius moral move or literary move could also indicate that this is something more impressive?
You more or less asked me what would impress me, and I'm a naive literalist, and so I would say if any prophet had said something like the world is just one object rotating around the sun, something like that. They never do. I mean, it's always some kind of moral lesson which leaves me cold.
Well, why is it that there is no...
Makes a case for objective morality. Just saying. Just saying. Supports Richard Dawkins' belief.
I mean, they say that God meets you where you're at, right? And there are some people who just care about scientific truth. That's what they know. That's their profession.
Well,
Someone like Richard. Why is there not anything in the Bible for them?
Oh, I think the idea that sacrifice is the basis of the community is a remarkable and scientific.
I think if you're going to go to the Bible for something that is not literal, for those that think literally, I don't think it'll ever make sense to them. That doesn't mean that they're not useful or don't have value. But we have to be able to, we have to have somebody that, this is why I think both are true and why it's on a continuum and it unifies, because you have somebody that thinks the most literally in the world, and then you have somebody that's on the other side of the spectrum abstractly. It only makes sense that it's all true, and it's how you can use both, I guess. But in order for somebody who thinks literally, or typically physicists, or maybe not physicists, I don't know, scientists, they like truths, they like it this way. In order for them to be convinced of the other thing involves that person relaying the message in like scientific jargon, vice versa, like in the same way. So, like I said, there's no language for it. Told you.
Particularly valid hypothesis. I think that it's precisely
Do you guys want a snack? I kind of want a snack.
akin to the, what would you say, to the process of cortical maturation. I think they're the same thing. Because as we mature, we move farther away from the immediate gratification of our self-centered emotional and motivational needs to a ethos of care that brings our future self into the picture and a wider and wider array of other people. And I think that's associated with cortical maturation. In fact, I think the purpose of the cortex, a purpose of the cortex is to bring the dynamics of the short-sighted underlying motivational and emotional systems into the kind of harmony that allows for communal existence and the protection of the future at the same time that the present is, what would you say, cared for and attended to. That there's a kind of harmony there. There's also a pattern there. It's not arbitrary at all. And I think we know this biologically, is that the number of ways, and I think we already alluded to this, the number of ways that a society can organize itself so that each individual can harmonize their own future with the present and do that simultaneously with many other people, there's a very limited universe of possibilities there.
Richard,
Very limited universe.
Richard asked you before about the difference between a story or an idea naturally evolving over the course of numerous manuscripts and throughout human history, and the idea of it being divinely inspired. And you were seeming to imply that these are almost interchangeable concepts. Now, if that's the case, when you say that this divine spirit behind the Bible is actually just the way that it has evolved throughout the human history, throughout the different manuscripts that we've had, then saying that that is what divinity is, I think for you may drag the mundane up into the realm of divinity. But I think for people like Richard and for many people listening, what it does instead is drags the divine down to the realm of the mundane.
Very well put, yes.
When we think about wildly successful businesses,
do people not understand the multiple types of truths? Like, I learned that in school. That's not like out of my mind. I need to skip this. Thank you for the super chat. Keep your girl off OnlyFans one chat at a time. Process! Snack fun. Plus your soul. Okay, wait. I don't know where this ended. Put a 1 in the chat if you think in systems and you notice patterns in systems, or am I like actually on the brink of insanity? Do people like, I have each system in my brain layered on top of each other, and it's like check, 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 X, 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 X. Somebody has a belief. Is there a pattern that fits it? Well, kinda, 2 of them. And if they don't all fit it, I erase it. Well, I put it in a different category. I'm like, over there, kind of like a clothes pile when you're looking for new pants. I'm like, those are okay. I'm not in love with them, you know?
A purpose of the cortex is to bring the dynamics of the short-sighted underlying motivational and emotional systems into the kind of harmony that allows for communal existence and the protection of the future at the same time that the present is, what would you say, cared for and attended to. That there's a kind of harmony there. There's also a pattern there. It's not arbitrary at all. And I think we know this biologically, is that the number of ways, and I think we already alluded to this, the number of ways that a society can organize itself so that each individual can harmonize their own future with the present and do that simultaneously with many other people, there's a very limited universe of possibilities there.
Richard asked you before about the difference between a story or an idea naturally evolving over the course of numerous manuscripts and throughout human history, and the idea of it being divinely inspired. And you were seeming to imply that these are almost interchangeable concepts. Now, if that's the case, when you say that this divine spirit behind the Bible is actually just the way that it has evolved throughout the human history, throughout the different manuscripts that we've had, then saying that that is what divinity is, I think for you may drag the mundane up into the realm of divinity.
Are we at the same spot? We're at the same spot. Sorry, my bad. I wasn't focused. I was reading. We back.
Exactly right. That's the problem.
Well, I don't.
You don't
look,
see the difference.
Well, look at it this way. So, for example, in this conversation, you know this to be the case. Like, there's various ways that this conversation could go sideways, right? Seriously, like we could, but either of us could try to win. Either of us could try to demonstrate our intellectual superiority, right? Each of us could misrepresent the other. Or we could both try, and I do think we are in fact trying that, and I think Alex is helping along with that just fine. We could try to follow the thread of the exploratory truth and see if we could get somewhere. Now, I don't think there is any difference between that, by the way, and what's expressed in the biblical texts as the spirit of the Logos. That's why we have dialogue.
I'm very interested in the possibility that truths emerge through evolving manuscripts. Now, that's a very interesting idea, and it's totally different from divine inspiration.
We got him.
I want to pursue it because I don't believe in divine inspiration, but I would be prepared to believe in evolving manuscripts.
Well,
We got it. Okay. Finally, he realizes that Jordan is like crediting him. It's fine. It's fine. It's like literally this whole time he was like, I took your sort of theory and it's deeper than you see. And it's like a student just trying to get recognition. Shit's hard. I love it. They made some ground.
I would say, well, I
Love
would
to
say
see it.
this is why I had set forward the possibility of taking a look, particularly at Mircea Eliade, because that's where you'd find the best work. He's brilliant. The history of, I believe that if you studied the history of religious ideas, it's a 3-volume manuscript, or the sacred and the profane, which is probably his single best work, that you'd see profound analogies between the manner in which you've been construing the world biologically, including the trains of thought that led you to the development of the idea of the meme. I really believe that.
Well, analogies is one.
Hoping he's self-aware. He absolutely, I feel like he is. He's essentially saying, like, you have to be conscious of all your thoughts and why they came there. Write it down. There's some utility in me just speaking my mind, okay? Subscribe.
Thing, but
Like
is it
the
the
video.
same thing?
I think it's the same. I do. I think, look, I don't know. That's why I'd like your opinion on it. You know, well, seriously, like, it's a complicated question. I've talked to
Jordan and his logos.
Most people don't know both literatures.
His
There's not a lot of
substrate
people to discuss this sort of thing with. Camille Paglia, I talked to Camille Paglia about this. She studied the work of a man named Erich Neumann. Neumann wrote a book called Origins and History of Consciousness, which is a work of genius, and also another book called The Great Mother, which is a study of the symbolism of the feminine. It's a great book. Paglia told me that she believed that if the Academy would have turned to Erich Neumann, who's a student of Jung, although the greatest student of Jung, and maybe one who surpassed him, that the entire culture war that's torn the universities apart wouldn't have happened. People don't know this literature. And let me give you an example of this. You tell me what you think about this. Okay, so I spent a fair bit of time studying the psychophysiology of the hypothalamus. Okay, so the hypothalamus is set up, it's got 2 halves, basically. One half deals with fundamental motivated states, hunger, thirst, defensive aggression, sexuality, and so forth. And when those areas are dominated, the biologically relevant goal is activated and perceptions are oriented towards that goal. Okay, so now then you might ask yourself, well, what happens if all those biologically motivated states are satiated? And the answer seems to be is that the other half of the hypothalamus kicks in and it mediates exploratory behavior. And so the default structure of the mammalian nervous system is, if satiated or in doubt, explore and gather new information. There's no difference between that and hero mythology. They are the same thing. They're the same thing. The dragon fight, for example, which is the oldest story we have. It's coded in the Mesopotamian mythology. The dragon fight story is explore the dangerous unknown, discover the treasure that revitalizes the community. There's no difference between that and the science that you practice. They're the same thing.
What do you think of
It's
that,
the
Richard?
same story.
I don't know what to make of that. I mean, you say they're the same story. You've analogized the dragon fight to
Well, how many dragons
fighting
have
Satan.
you overcome in your life?
I'm not interested in dragons. I'm interested in
He literally thinks it's a literal dragons. Richard, you're boring.
in reality.
Okay, so okay, so I read a book a while back
I love
that
him.
described the biological reality of the dragon. Say, well, there's no such thing as a dragon. It's like, okay, is there such a thing as a predator?
Of course.
Well, that's a meta category. What's the category of predator? Bear, eagle, if you're a primate. Fire? Is fire a predator?
No.
Well, it's complicated because a fire kills you. Okay, so is there a worse predator than serpentine, flying, fire-breathing reptile? Is that not the imagistic equivalent of predator? So in what way, if predator is real, in what way isn't dragon real? It doesn't take that much imagination to see the identity. And then wouldn't the fundamental task of edible primates be to figure out how to overcome the dragon forever?
I don't know why you say dragon. I mean, we have lions, we have tigers, we have saber-tooths, we have...
Because all of it together doesn't exist as one, Richard. But all things that fall in this category will be deemed bad, Richard. Dad.
Why not
Tyrannosaurs
abstract?
out
It's
there.
fine, but why not abstract? Because it's for the same reason that we have the term predator. Like we have the term bear, lion, Komodo dragon. Well, you make an amalgamation, you say, well, the relevant set of features is an image. Well, what's the image? Predator as such. What's the image of that? The dragon that never disappears. And then there's a twist on that, which is so cool. It's so interesting because you can imagine rabbit mythology, which would be something like predator appears, freeze. But that's not the human story. The human story is predator appears, there's a treasure somewhere. Right? That's a completely different pathway of evolutionary significance. Like the way that we construe the world isn't freeze like predator. It's like, oh, there's a predator. Maybe there's something valuable lurking in our conflict with it. You know, our sticks and our spears that enable our fragile bodies to stand up against the dragons of the world.
So a dragon is a pictorial representation of the abstracted concept of a predator.
Yes.
As you say, we already have the term predator. And so it might be useful in art, in narrative, to, I mean, you can't paint an abstraction.
We had the image way before we had the word.
Sure, okay, but
No, but that's
That's
seriously
important. That's the main point. Sorry, I didn't mean to yell. I'm so sorry. That's the main point. Is, you know how we've always been like, oh, if somebody becomes, I don't know, if somebody speaks in tongues, that's odd, right? Okay, I shouldn't say speaks in tongues. Sorry. If somebody can already, like a child can already recognize certain things about the world, it's like, was it ingrained because of the parents or was it like generationally ingrained? And it's, behaviors can be generational, but we never have talked about thoughts, beliefs, cognitive processes really being that way. And if they have, it was like slowly, no, they would still say that they're instinctual, like behavior. Okay, I'll shut up.
thing to understand.
But now we have the word. We have the word predator. And maybe if we were doing art, maybe if we were all going to sort of draw a picture or tell a story, and we wanted to invent a story to give our children a good moral message, we might invent this dragon or use this dragon as...
Well, we do always. We do it continually.
Exactly, we do.
We do it with Harry Potter. We do it with the Lord of the Rings. We do it with the Avengers.
But when you say...
there's no escaping from it.
But when you say the biology of a dragon, you must understand how that can be misleading as to the enterprise that you're engaging in, because we're talking here about narrative, we're talking here about art, we're talking here...
Just to recap, Peterson is saying he believes that the imagery, the Bible, religious text, the myths of life, okay, the hero myth, these understandings of lessons have a biological component to them, that it's ingrained. of course, like it's not making sense, but he's building off of Dawkins' theory. He's saying just like memes can replicate like a virus, thoughts have done the same thing throughout the course of the human experience. So that it has a biological component if you look at the way that it shows itself. He's giving an instance of how in the religious texts, like how something like a dragon could represent all bad things or all things that harm you. So when something is coming to your vision, I mean, like literally something bad, a snake comes up to you, or something bad like some man tries to kill you. The best course of action is to not run away, but to deal with it head on. And the imagery of it is used in healthcare, the snakes and shit, you know, the one like the serpent thing. And it's like, although that's not going to be evidence to prove it to Richard, it's showing that it's been used over the course of millennia, and it's also been used in things that it should correlate to. And it's like, well, people can just do that, right? So just like the memes, it almost becomes automatic. What if the same thing, like how we all see the snake thing as healthcare, was automatic? Does that make sense, or am I just like making it more complicated?
About representations in literature.
I don't think the category of dragon is any less valid than the category of lion.
Any less biological?
Well, it depends on your level of analysis. We have the term predator, which implies that all predators have something in common, because otherwise we wouldn't have the term. It's like there's no reason to assume ontological priority for the category of lion over the category of predator. Like it depends on all that would determine which of those terms should be used is the purpose towards which the conceptualization is being directed. Like if you want to identify a particular class of predator, well, then lion is a good term.
You would say that lions are an instantiation of this bracket term of predator.
Well, I would also say...
Would you therefore say that a lion is an instantiation of the bracket term of dragon?
Yes. Yes, because, see... Because we're not only fact-oriented creatures, right? It actually matters to us whether we get eaten. Like it's one thing to lay out the nomenclature of the animal kingdom. It's another thing to remember that predators can eat you. And then it's another thing, and this is very interesting, and it's relevant to that story of the bronze serpent. It's like, what do we want to teach our children? Well, to identify predators, obviously. Well, what do we want to teach them more profoundly? What attitude they should take towards the eternal fact of the predator. And the attitude they should take is something like the courage to voluntarily confront.
Okay, so again, why is that significant? Why is that significant? Because when you think about religious text or something that's creating an imagery that is telling you to attack it, doesn't matter if it's this, or this, you must face it head on. It shows that these texts, I don't know if it proves it 100%, but it definitely gives it like, it's like if we know from these, how do you call it? If you know these abstract thoughts, or metaphorical thoughts, if you know the lesson from it is to face it head on, that leads Jordan Peterson to believe, and myself, that these beliefs or religion have had an evolutionary adaptation. What do you call it? They have a more tangible use for evolution. It's like, okay, before I would say religion would calm people down. They didn't necessarily have to believe in it, right? No, it's like ingrained, automatic, like a meme. I don't know how to articulate it.
And not to run away.
He's trying to prove that it has more, that it's the same as a meme. He believes it goes deeper than just like some mind virus. He thinks that it is, you're born with it. Like it is evolved so far that it becomes automatic because it's useful. Like that's because there's utility. Jesus.
And not to hide and not to freeze and not to casually
Imagine.
demonize, but to assume that in the combat with the eternal predator,
Thank
an
you,
eternal
Dennis.
treasure might be found. And that's exactly what you do, whether you know it or not, when you teach a child to be courageous. And we know from the psychological literature that generalizes. And I do think it's identical with the mechanism of learning in human beings, because kids, us, we always learn on the edge. You know, in your own life, I know.
True.
And I don't want to be presumptuous, but
Put a 1 in the chat if you only remembered testing because you literally did it last minute. Maybe that's why we're all ADD. Not all of us. Okay, I'm kidding. It was a joke. It was metaphorical. Like the video if you haven't liked it already. I want to get a snack. Do you guys want something? I know I heard coffee.
no doubt there have been situations where you've been battling to have your ideas distributed, even to modify your own conceptions when you had something new to learn. That's a sacrifice. You have to kill your stupidity so that you can move forward. That's what happens in the story of Abraham, by the way, when he makes sequential sacrifices. So in the story of Abraham, you tell me what you think about this, because it staggered me when I understood it. Abraham is a protected person. He doesn't have to lift a finger. He lives in the socialist utopia. He's got everything delivered hand to mouth. He's at home till he's 70. And God comes to him as the voice of adventure, which is something remarkable to see, and says, you leave your zone of comfort and go out into the world. Have your terrible adventure. And Abraham says yes. And then a series of cataclysms occurs around him, just like it does in every adventurous life. And every time an episode concludes, he makes a sacrifice. Why? To get rid of what's stupid and old about him, so that he can progress and transform. And that happens to such a degree that he gets a new name, which means he's changed so dramatically he's not even the person he used to be. And that's a consequence of following that adventurous pathway. And that's all coded in the story.
I think we just have to agree that we have different kinds of minds, and you're interested in symbols, and I'm interested in facts. I mean, let's take predators. I mean, predators, I'm fascinated by predators. Predators are, the relationship between predators and prey is an arms race, an evolutionary arms race. And whenever you see a really complicated, beautifully designed piece of biology,
I just read one of the comments, the first one. It was like, Jordan Peterson's like, let's kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And then it says Richard Dawkins, that's ridiculous. Wait, what did it say? That's ridiculous. We aren't killing any birds. We are sitting here talking. Dawkins, was Cain real? Peterson, that's irrelevant to me. Is Cain hyper real? Dawkins, that's irrelevant to me. Wait, what? Why is this a meme? In comments, Peterson, the unstoppable force. Dawkins, the immovable object. Alex, the son listening to his parents argue. I was explaining to my wife why this episode is so exciting, and her summary. So it's like Godzilla versus King Kong. Why are there memes and comments?
what Hume, I think,
that's always been a thing.
one of Hume's characters called things that ravish into admiration, or all who contemplate them. This is almost certainly the result of an arms race, probably between predators and prey, could be between parasites and hosts. Mm-hmm. And so if we are talking about adaptations to just the climate, woolly rhinoceroses grow hair because it's getting cold, that's relatively boring. Mm-hmm. But when it's an adaptation to a predator, then you get an escalation of adaptations by prey, which are countered by predators, which are countered by prey, countered by... So you get a gradual escalation. Now, that's interesting. That explains why you have animals that run fast, why they have keen sense organs, why they have teeth, why they have sharp teeth, why they have behavior patterns that either protect them from predators or...
Is that why people manipulate?
Or if they're predators, help them to catch prey. The idea of the arms race is the thing that grabs me. The arms race between nothing to do with dragons and mythology.
So fair enough, right? And I share your appreciation for that remarkable, the remarkable phenomena that emerge in consequence of that. Okay, so let's take the idea of arms race. All right, so here's how I would construe what I said in what I think might be your terms.
Okay.
All right, we transformed the battle with the predator into a meme battle. We abstracted it so that we could figure out how to deal not with a predator, but with the class of all possible predators. Right, exactly. And the appropriate way to deal with the class of all possible predators is something like a meta-ethic. It's a stance that, let me give you an example of this. We actually know something about this psychophysiologically. And you can look
Is this going to be integrated?
at it spiritually or physically, and it doesn't matter. So for example, if you take people in psychotherapy and they're accidentally exposed to something they're afraid of, they have a stress response that's damaging if it's sustained, and they become more frightened. But if you expose them to exactly the same stressor, and they do it voluntarily, they manifest an entirely different pattern of psychophysiological activation. Okay, and it's a stance of challenge, right, and not of fear. All right, and so one of the things that you're doing in psychotherapy when you get people to expose themselves to, you could say predators, because that's an accurate way of dealing with it, is that you get them to shift into a mode of voluntary confrontation instead of prey-like apprehension and retreat. And what they learn from that is that they can embody that pattern, which I would call a spirit metaphysically. They can embody that, they can practice it. It's also the case, there's some evidence that there's epigenetic consequences of that. If you practice that process of voluntary confrontation with the terrible unknown, it can catalyze transformations that reach all the way down into the cellular. And so we abstracted the fight with the predator into the imaginal space. We play out various tactics. Some of them are conserved and transmitted. They adapt themselves to the structure of human memory, and they make the foundation for our most fundamental narratives. Look, you know, the reference I made to Harry Potter, the reference I made to The Lord of the Rings and to the Avengers, these aren't casual references. You know, we spend most of our high-end computational power generating fictional worlds where we can portray meme battles so that everyone can observe them.
Yes. So lion as genetic, dragon as mimetic. Richard, this concept of the dragon as the abstracted predator as a whole. Can we talk meaningfully about the truth
of the mind
in these stories, where instead of talking about a predator or this predator or that predator, we're talking about the concept of predators as a whole?
The dragon's a meme.
Yes.
The dragon's a meme.
Yeah.
It's a deep meme.
Well, it doesn't get me, doesn't impress me. I mean, I like
it's
reality.
It's your framework. Like, it's your framework. He's literally making your whole thing bigger than what it is. Wake up.
And it obviously impresses Jordan, and that's fine. It just, we have a different kind of mind, I think.
Well, I had a comment about that too, you know, because I actually think that's true. So there's a psychological trait, openness, and openness fractionates into two types. One type of mind is associated with deep interest in ideas. People like that tend to prefer nonfiction. A variant of that is openness proper, and it's associated with a much deeper orientation towards the fictional and metaphorical. I do think we have different kinds of minds, but if we accept the presumption that there is a unity of knowledge, and I don't know if that's a presumption that you entertain or presume or share, because we could discuss the alternative. My sense is that those two pathways have to unify. Now, I don't think we know how to unify them in the West. That's why there is this conflict between the scientific and the religious.
Thank you. Okay, that's what we've been saying. Hello, Jordan. Welcome to the cool side of the world. It's very lonely.
It's not like I know how to rectify that.
Also, I'm very confident that people are gonna catch on to this. If you're not following it yet, that's okay. I actually really think people are gonna catch on to it. So I think ChatGPT might expedite it. I hope. As long as it stays neutral, then yeah. But there's truth. I look at it like it's a partial truth. Because you're dealing with your perspective, somebody else who's watching you, their perspective, what we collectively do in the US, and then what you collectively do in the US when you deal with the consequence. I'm thinking of like law. But it goes beyond that. It goes globally. But then it also, you're able to step into like literally, I think, like ninth perspective. I don't know how to articulate it, but I can draw it. I think I could draw it. It's like, do you guys remember the movie? It's one of my favorites, actually. Interstellar. You know, at the end where he's trying to make his way back. What actor is that? Cooper? No, that's the name of the daughter. What's the name of that actor? Gyllenhaal? Jake Gyllenhaal? Is that him? I don't know. He's trying to make his way back through multiple dimensions. You remember how it looked? Okay. Kind of like that, but not on like the concept of time is different. It's like like if you think of multiple dimensions, it's like there's a version of you somewhere around the world that's doing something a little bit different than what you're doing now. Or you might be doing something entirely different, right? But if you view yourself, and this is going to sound so bizarre, forgive me. If you view yourself as you as self, you as like somebody's kid, it's like you as also your parents something, and then like really stretched out, almost like you could view it down, like top down, earthwise. I don't know how to articulate it. Oh, think of it like you see. Okay, if you're literal, easy. Think of it like you're in a two-way mirror, like you're being observed. In a two-way mirror, you know what I mean. You could see that in like a police thing or the department. You could see it in a hospital setting. But imagine that you're being watched in a two-way mirror. Oh, I can't seem to make it fit. It's like a two-way mirror, but also the end of the fucking movie, Interstellar, but without the concept of time. But then, like, there's a concept of time. It's almost like hierarchical, like top down, maybe. So maybe think of the end of the movie, Interstellar, in the opposite way that it's depicted. Is it stacked, or am I just imagining that? Stack it, then through a two-way mirror twice. Makes no sense. I'll figure it out. I will figure it out. I'm confident.
The best I can say is this
I'm
is
trying.
what I've learned from studying those stories. But I would also say, because I've studied your work, I do believe that idea that you formulated of meme is exactly the same thing that Mircea Eliade is detailing out in his work. And I think the reason that he's not attended to by the universities because he's passé in the history of religious ideas is because everything he says demolishes the postmodern Marxists, demolishes them, which is something that seriously needs to be done. And so I keep hoping, I think, God, it would be such a remarkable thing for Dr. Dawkins to know, especially Iliad's work, although Eric Neumann would be a close second, because it takes the notion of meme, which is what was the recreation of the world in imaginal space and the transmission of those recreations and their potential battles. That's what you specified. And it expands it out into something that extends across millennia. It's the logical extension of your idea. And it's not like people know this because there aren't people who know both literatures.
So this idea of lion as lion as gene,
It's funny.
dragon as meme, I think in so many words that it sounds like that's sort of a summary of what you're getting at. And I get the impression, Richard, that you might agree with the idea that the dragon is an effective mimetic abstraction of the concept of individual predators, but it's just not that impressive.
Yes.
It's just not that,
Well,
that it's
I can't
true,
see
but it's
how
not an
it
impressive
cannot be
truth.
impressive at the same time that you are compelled and interested by the idea of meme. I mean, let me ask you a psychological question, if you don't mind. You're obviously welcome not to answer it, but there's a reason that the idea of meme gripped you, and there's a reason it spread. It's because you put your finger on something. So can I ask you?
I think I have a good way of putting it. Yes, but okay. You know, when you're looking at an optical illusion and it takes a second for it to click and then you see it, similarly to something like when you look at like an ink blot thing and first it looks like a butterfly and then it looks like kind of like that but evolved. Like there's a ladybug, it just flew away. Evolved. So you know the moment when you look at an optical illusion, you're just like, I can't see it, and then it clicks. And then if you look at something else or you'll lose it for a second. That's what it feels like in my brain. So it's like in the moments that it oscillates and like makes a pause, it's like I only have a few seconds to like try to gather the whole meaning. Kind of like when you wake up from a dream, sweating though, you like were lucid, you remember, but then it's there it goes. I wrote about this on Substack, but the optical illusion, because it's like you see it in all its vividness and then you lose it like that. But you know, if you just think about it hard enough or look at it long enough, it'll come back. Or if you look at it from a different angle, the whole thing will become clear. And if you think about time, it's like certain ways you look at it will make it appear obvious for longer. I can't figure out what side it is, though. That's the best way, okay? I'm trying.
How that idea emerged and why it attracted you?
As a Darwinian, I'm interested in the process of natural selection. Natural selection is the differential survival of replicating entities. DNA is a very excellent replicating entity, whose replication and selection has given rise to the whole of life on Earth. I wanted to make the point that DNA is not the only possible replicator you could imagine. There might be there probably is on other planets, a different kind of replicator, not DNA.
Yeah.
And then I thought, maybe we don't have to go to other planets. Maybe there's another replicator staring us in the face. The virus of the mind, something that spreads not by DNA replication, but by
like, as you say this process, remember the blue and black dress that went viral? The white and gold one? Was there another one? Or was it the same one? Yeah. You know, it's almost like trying to explain that red is actually olive green. You guys know people that are colorblind think olive green is red. Or it's not that they think it's, that's what they perceive. It's like that. It exists. It just gotta get there.
imitation from mind to mind. So it could be a fashion in clothes, it could be a musical style, it could be an accent, a speech accent.
Don't tell me about art and music, Mr. Richard.
It could be a children's game that spreads through
Yeah.
school. All these things are replicators.
What about, where the hell did we get the idea that Marilyn Manson removed a rib to do you know what? Where did that come from? Princess, didn't we talk about this? It's like, because now it's like, yeah, you saw somebody make a Twitter post about where did it come from back in 2005. I remember my sister asked me. My sister's 4 years older, but like kids were talking. Where'd they get it from? Was it because he was strange? You know, the irony of this whole thing is that Marilyn Manson is like the depiction of Satan to religious people back in the 80s, maybe 90s. I don't know. He was demonized in the media as like corrupting the youth and shit, but you talk to him, he's like the nicest, most down, way ahead of his time, like level fucking 200 thinking. Just, I love him. But anyways, he was like it's like, of course people made up this thing that would make him. But what would that serve the purpose for? Well, Jordan saying that all of this arguably has an advantage from like a Darwinian sexual selection thing, but they haven't gotten, well, he mentioned it in the beginning, but I don't think that they elaborate on it further. They might. Has he talked about women being hypergamous yet? Sorry.
Which spread by a non-genetic means and might therefore potentially be the basis for a form of Darwinian selection.
Yep.
Darwinian selection would be popularity, the spreadability of an idea.
The longevity of an idea?
Yes, longevity of an idea, the spreadability, the fidelity of the idea.
How about the grip of motivation by the idea? Like, would you expect?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
that's a possibility. And I would even concede that an archetype might be a one way in which certain memes might spread more than others. It might be compatible with a Jungian archetype.
They're getting through to each other.
That's my answer to the question. It was coming at it as a Darwinian and wanting to make the point that DNA probably, having spent the rest of the book stressing the gene as the unit of selection, I want to make the point that it may not be the only one.
Okay. So that's what I understood from your work. So it is on that grounds that I saw the concordance between what you were doing and what Eliade was doing in his investigation into the spread of religious ideas. I'd like what you described is what I understood. Okay, so let me ask you another question about that. Okay, so could you imagine a scenario where a meme had sufficient functional adaptive significance so that the individuals who acted it out gained a reproductive edge?
Yes.
Okay.
Marilyn
So
Manson.
then you could imagine a situation where there was, I think I've got this right, a Baldwin effect between the meme and the genome.
Yes.
Okay. So then could you imagine an effect where the heroic hunters of the past who decided to cease acting like prey animals, maybe when they got rocks or sticks, were acting under the impulse that facing down the predator was the appropriate strategy? Because I was thinking about this reproductively. Like, you know that women are hypergamous. They like men cross-culturally about 4 years older than they are.
It's insane bringing that up,
Most
but I get it.
fundamental female pornographic fantasy involves vampires, werewolves, pirates, surgeons, and billionaires. Dominant men who are capable of standing up to predators, who can be brought into an individual relationship. Okay, so that's the fundamental reproductive story meme that seems to drive women. It's allied with the hero myth. They're the
That is a red pill thing. Rollo talks about that. There are all these mental models that you have to. hold on.
Different variants of
I
the
gotta sit
same
with that.
story, the different sexual variants of the same story. And it seems to me it's not unreasonable to note that that's the fundamental story of humanity.
Meaning, you know, when you ask women, like, what are you into? And they give you like an answer it's true, but when you see what they really go for, it's like some of it's true, but it's not all true the way that it's depicted, right? It's almost like literally. It's like elements of it are true, but it's not fully true. He's pointing out that there's a repetition or a theme, if you will, that is playing out in the same type of Darwin sexual selection way, where do men adopt these mental models like the hero myth because there's some sort of adaptation or some sort of advantage using it for sexual selection? What happens when time is different? Remember how I was saying time? It's different, but I don't know how to word it. Which usually when I get confused, or not confused, but bombarded with thoughts, I can usually figure out what the purpose was for after like a good night's rest. I try to keep up. I try to keep up with it like as linearly as I can, because I actually do think about it. I'm like, why that way? But anyways, is that why men adopt these mental models of, I don't know, masculinity? And if they do that, if we now know it's all on a continuum where all things are partially true, does that mean,
And so I don't understand why you're not
We
impressed by
started
that.
talking about the Baldwin effect, and suddenly we got into women, what women like. I mean,
Well, the men who act out the heroic meme are much more likely to reproduce.
It's an example, but perhaps
science, Richard. He's saying that it's beyond your fucking
we
meme.
need to explain what the Baldwin
I was
effect
going to
is.
say that's probably helpful.
Yes, that would be useful.
Okay. It was suggested by Baldwin, I think in the late 19th century. It's a kind of genetic assimilation of a cultural or a learned idea. So the idea is that certain animals learn things, learn a clever trick. It might be nut cracking by chimpanzees, for example, or potato washing by Japanese macaques, or opening milk bottles by English tits. And it perhaps spread as mimetically as an epidemic of copying, and that's known to have happened with the blue tits and great tits in Britain. Now, certain individuals are likely to learn it faster than others, and there may be genetic variation in the speed with which they learn it. And as the generations go by, natural selection would have favored speed of learning the new trick. And eventually they would have learned the new trick so fast they didn't need to learn it at all.
Right.
It becomes genetically assimilated into the genome. That's the Baldwin effect.
Okay, that I would say that that's essentially the same pattern of archetype evolution that's implicit in the Jungian theoretical
Well, that's
model.
very interesting, because that suggests
made
that Jungian archetypes might be genetically assimilated via the Baldwin effect.
Yes,
So that's a fascinating idea.
Yes. Okay, so now
I know we're coming to the end of our time soon anyway. It's nice to end on a shared point of interest, which is the Baldwin effect and the archetype's potential origin in the Baldwin effect. Do you think that is something that is worth exploring further? Is that something that we can
crucial
that we can
it's
test?
crucial
I
to
think
this
it's
because
interesting, yes.
well, it speaks of the potential relationship
Oh,
between
we did it.
the spread of memes and the alteration of the genetic process. I would say it probably happens fastest by sexual selection. So
Yes.
right. So imagine that a meme. Okay, so imagine a meme develops a representation, imaginal, and the people who embody it are more effective in dealing with predators. And then imagine that there's a concordance between that and the attractiveness of those males to women. Seems highly probable. Well, then you can see that because sexual selection is a pretty rapid mechanism, that Baldwin effect gets spinning
I totally
forward
agree
very
with that.
rapidly.
I've even suggested, actually, a slightly way out suggestion, that the human habit of standing on our hind legs might have been sexually selected and then genetically assimilated via the Baldwin effect. Chimpanzees do sometimes walk on their hind legs. Now, if...
He's talking about bipedalism. Is that why women are not evolved to have kids? Or, I'm sorry, our wombs are technically, fuck, it's been a minute. Our womb, like, okay, we can have kids, but compared to other species, it takes so long for us to give birth to a baby that is too young. It still needs the parents right when it's born. Think of like a horse. That thing is fucking galloping when it comes out of the womb, and they're only pregnant for a certain amount of time. Humans are not the same, so it's like their heads are bigger, it's more painful, and he's saying that would have been selected for sexually. Because if you could be on your hind legs, what's over there? I don't know. I'm
For
sorry.
mimetic reasons, that was sexually attractive in our so that it
display
spread
issue?
as an epidemic of sexual display. Then natural selection could have favored those individuals who were best at standing on their hind legs, genetically speaking, and then it would become genetically assimilated. This sexually selected mimetic effect could have been genetically assimilated and given rise to the genetic tendency to walk on our hind legs.
So I remember what I was going to ask you about this. So imagine you have a situation in the biblical narratives where the idea of sacrifice is dramatized and ritualized. So it's acted out. It's not exactly understood. It's dramatized and acted out. Well, I believe there's a concordance between the probability that sacrifice would be offered and the ability of someone to forego gratification or to work towards a future end. They're the same thing. And the ability to forego gratification, which is associated with cortical development, is a great predictor of future success. Let's say future, because we know, for example, that trait conscientiousness, which is something like the ability to delay gratification, is the best predictor that isn't cognitive of long-term future success. The ability to sacrifice the present for the future is a hallmark of a strategy of adaptation that's going to propagate down the generations.
That's interesting. As a Canadian, you probably know about the potlatch phenomenon.
Yes.
Where a great sacrifice is a social display, destruction of one's own property which is a form of sacrifice. Destruction of one's own property is a mark of prestige.
Right. Well, it indicates...
Didn't Elon do that? Hi, honey. I know. You're done? You're like, Mom, come on. We got about 2 minutes. Can you hold? Babe, talk to me. Talk to me. Rue, you good? Okay. If she growls at me, then we're gonna... Okay, we gotta go. Dog says it's time to go. But just before I go, Rural Man Life says, cool dragon movie, Reign of Fire, starring Matthew McConaughey. That's who it was. And Christian Bale from 2002. I'll definitely check it out. I will send you guys, because I have the link to the... Babe, I'm coming. She runs this shit. Okay, put it in the chat. Like the video, comment, subscribe. And until next time, love you. Bye.